architecture and landscape design and site work. And so this project of sustainable sites curriculum at Yestermorrow has been one that has been coming for a while and brewing for a bit. And so it's really exciting for me to see this speaker series take shape and the wonderful people who have come to give the talks as part of the series to then culminate in what I'll describe tonight as hopefully the launching of the next phase of our curriculum moving forward in the area of sustainable sites. Don't worry, I'm going to talk a little bit about the word sustainable, the word resilient, and the word site so that we can think about all those. As an architect or a recovering architect, maybe I'll say, I know that it's very common for architects to think about buildings as objects and not to be all that related to what's around them and not to responsibly work with what's around them. And so it's very important for me to bring the site and the building together and to not think of them separately and to always be very careful in the way we touch the earth when we are designing buildings. And so I'm hoping that this speaker series, this curriculum will really dive very deeply into a lot of our curriculum. So yeah, like I said, I'm going to go into just a few minutes talking about what is resilient, what is sustainable. I'm going to review the series that we've had, the 4 people who've talked prior to me tonight. I'm going to talk about what I believe are some of the important aspects of a site in general, and how we interact with that. And then I'm going to ask the so what question. So why is this stuff important? Why are we thinking about it? And some of those answers are going to come through the fact that we need to gather information, consider it, design and build with it, and then most importantly, because we are a school, teach it. So first of all, a sustainable site is resilient, and that means that it can handle things like stormwater and bring together community and provide shade and absorb carbon and perform multiple functions like bring together neighbors in order to make them care about furthering the resilience and the sustainability of a neighborhood or of a site through activities like planting trees. It's almost easier, unfortunately, in the United States today to define what isn't sustainable or resilient. We all know about McMansions and probably follow some of the funny social media people who talk about McMansions and their sheer size and number of gables and dormers and roof lines and chimneys. But here I was especially looking at the monoculture in front of the McMansion, the green lawn that really supports very, very, very little ecology and very little community other than the person living in that house. I also thought it was really funny that in Scottsdale, Arizona, there's a golf course that's owned by Waste Management. That seems somewhat interesting and ironic. The extraction of oil on the upper right, the tar sands in Alberta, is not sustainable or resilient, and we've got to find ways to move past that. And then in the lower right is Japanese knotweed, which does have some purpose, but we've heard from some of our lecturers prior to this that it really doesn't do a lot for erosion control or helping riverbanks or stopping the flow of water. And slowing, spreading, and sinking water is one of our biggest priorities, as we've learned from Friends of the Mad River and the Winooski Natural Resources Conservation District. Unfortunately, unlike the slide before where I said resilient things perform multiple functions, Japanese knotweed doesn't allow anything else to perform a function. So that's another reason that it's not resilient or sustainable, because it takes over and forms a mat that nothing else can penetrate. And it leafs out, it reproduces very strongly, and then it persists in the landscape much later than everything else. So it causes many ecological challenges. So a little bit of a review for what we have heard in the last 4 weeks. The first week was Holly Greenleaf, who came and talked about rain gardens for sustainable hydrology. Holly has a Greenleaf Design, is an ecological landscape design firm, and she also does a lot of really amazing illustration and graphic design. And I loved when she was here that we were talking about the fact that she studied art and botany and was able to put those two things together in a landscape design practice. Holly is one of our teachers for rain garden design and installation, which we have an example of here on campus. It handles all of the wastewater runoff, rainwater runoff from the roof of the bunkhouse and all of the other, there's sort of a curtain of runoff from the site around that building also that is stopped by that rain garden. And it's planted with beautiful flowering perennials and shrubs that filter and slow down and utilize the water that's there. And she will also be teaching a landscape design class for us in the spring. So Holly is a really great person for us. I think she's based over in Huntington, so she's a local and a lot of fun, and we loved having her here. The second week was Ian Quate, who's a landscape architect down in New York City, in Brooklyn. He gave a talk called Extremophile Environmentalism, which I found absolutely fascinating. His firm is called Fruit, and I think the logo is somewhat derived from what his topic of study has been, and that's the microbes that have developed in the Gowanus Canal. And there are, because it's a Superfund site, there are all these proposals, and they're moving forward with a proposal to clean up and extract and basically scour and then collect and dispose of everything that's in the bottom of the Gowanus Canal, which arguably is incredibly toxic and is an accumulation of many years of industry and urban runoff. But he has observed some incredible microbes that have come from a variety of places, including the humans that are also part of the ecology of the Gowanus Canal and Brooklyn. And so his point about conservatism and conservation is that there are communities and ecological functions occurring even though we may just look at these places as incredibly toxic and needing to just be scraped away and disposed of and made somebody else's problem somewhere else. And that's one of the things that isn't resilient or sustainable. And I just want to point that out. A lot of the time that we talk about cleaning up a site, that means we have to send it somewhere, and it doesn't just disappear. And so every choice we make, we have to think closely about where we're sending things that we don't want to have. I'm making it sound fairly dark. It wasn't that dark. It was actually a really, really beautifully presented and really fun presentation, and I really enjoyed it. So I highly recommend on all of these going back and looking at the videos, if the YouTube videos on our website, if you haven't watched them. The third week was Irish Addis and Luke Foley from Friends of the Mad River, and they were talking to us about the Ridge to River program, which is a really incredible program that we're so fortunate to have had born here in the Mad River Valley by Friends of the Mad River, an organization that's very closely linked to Yestermorrow and is almost as old as Yestermorrow and has a lot of the same board members and founder people. But Ira is instrumental in the story that I'm telling, because when John, my husband, and I moved up to Vermont full time, our driveway is pretty long, and it's a long slope down, and it just kept getting really eroded. And I knew a couple of the people at Friends of the Mad River, and turned out they had a grant funded program to come and do an analysis of your home and your driveway and all your site to see about erosion control and to see what's happening and what could be done better to, again, to slow spread and sink the water that's coming down your property. And so Ira walked my driveway, and then he walked the private road that we share with a few other houses. And we, kind of stumbled through the eroded crevices that you have to have a four-wheel drive to even get up the road. And that's not our driveway, that's more the common road. It's pretty bad. And he, had such an amazing list of recommendations. And then I said, Ira, what does one do once one gets these recommendations? I mean, as a landscape designer and a design build landscape person, I can see how I would do it, but how does the typical homeowner do anything that you recommend? And he said, unfortunately, there really aren't that many practitioners who are able to do the things we recommend. A lot of the driveways and roads around here erode quite a bit because they're the practices that the people have been doing for years don't quite work all that well and tend to erode. And so I started thinking about ways to get people trained so that then Friends of the Mad River could say, this person has undergone the job training, the best management practices training to be able to implement the stuff that we're recommending. So then the fourth week was Adelaide Dumm, who is at the Winooski Natural Resources Conservation District, the WNRCD. And the WNRCD and the Friends of the Mad River work really closely together. And they both have worked on, I won't say which one started which because I'm not exactly sure, but they both work very closely on the Storm Smart and Ridge to River programs. Friends of the Mad River has this concept of ridge to river. So where the water is flowing all the way from the ridge matters to what is happening in the river below, which then of course matters to what is downstream in the watershed. The Mad River flows to the Winooski flows to Lake Champlain flows to the St. Lawrence. So all of those are affected by gravel that is rushing out of my driveway, or a farm that has an overflow of manure, or a golf course that is using a high, concentration of phosphorus, or, all of those things are part of the equation of what's happening downstream. And so together, Friends of the Mad River and the Winooski Natural Resources Conservation District have done a lot to really further expand these programs and these concepts, and to be able to do the studies and get they're amazingly grant funded. And then I'll give a shout out to Adelaide and the WNRCD, because after they heard about the curriculum that I was trying to put together, they got on board and were able to get some bigger grants. And so I'm really grateful to them, because some of the grant funding that they got is what's going to help move this curriculum forward. So in case you can't tell, this Sustainable Sites Speaker Series, it's a lot of S's, was really an agglomeration of all the people who are really helping us to develop this curriculum. And I'm really excited that they're all so close in our network, because I'm sure that they'll be part of this process moving forward. They're all doing really great work, and then having an educational institution like Yestermorrow, they all seem really excited to be able to spread the word, because once, when you're drinking this Kool-Aid, then you just want everyone else to drink it too. And so we hope we can spread that Kool-Aid. So I said I talked a little bit about resilience, and I talked a little bit about sustainability, but I also think it's important to just stop and think about what is a site, what's in a site, what goes into the consideration of a site. And as I sort of said earlier, as a recovering architect, it's not just a place for building. There is the earth to consider, the geology of it, the hydrology of it. There's water underground, there's surface water. There's the ecological community, of course, which is the part that most of us think of it from a site, or a lot of us hopefully think of. The flora, the fauna, the fungi, and how all of those things interact. And then there are external elements that constitute part of the site, and that is weather, the forces of that weather and other aspects of materials that are coming through the site, the water, wind, seismic causes of erosion, And then there is the sense of place, the community. There's the fauna community, the fungi community, the insects, the microbes, but then there are also the people and what it means to the people. And I just want to pause here and say a lot of times people think that nature or ecology might not include the human. It's kind of an us versus them thought, but it really isn't. We are inextricably connected to every site that we inhabit. And the earth is at a point where humans have basically affected every place on the earth, with maybe a couple of exceptions deep underwater. But so just keep that in mind, that the human impact is always part of the equation, and you can't deny that. And so you can't always just fault the human either, that it's a fact. It's part of the community. So it needs to be figured out how it's going to interact with the site. And the better we plan and the better we design for that, the better off we'll be. Whoops. There's a funny delay on there. Okay. So what? We've gone through what the sustainable sites, where it came from, and how I sort of started to come up with the idea, and who some of our partners have been to help us with getting it started. So then there's a little bit of a process, a pathway that we need to take to get there. And Yestermorrow has been around for over 40 years. We've been on this campus for over 30 years. We've really occupied it and inhabited this building for over 20 years, but we've been on the site longer than that. And so, of course, with all of the ecological designers and permaculturists and architects and planners that have come through Yestermorrow's community, there's been a lot of thought put into what to do with the site and how we will move forward with what we do here and how we turn it into a teaching opportunity. But we need to first, on any site, gather data and learn from the ecology that I talked about earlier, the earth, the plants, the animals, the sense of place. And that's also part of considering the ecosystem, the human impact, the land use that has happened, the deforestation, the reforestation, the polluted water, the eroding water. And so then all of those processes, the gathering of the data, the learning and the observing and the mapping and the analyzing and the considerations then lead us to the design process with a goal, in the case of our sustainable sites conversation that we've been having, of slowing, spreading, and sinking the water. But more than that, it's about restoring an ecosystem, restoring a place that, I mean, even this 38 acres that we're here on today has gone through multiple lives as land use, from the Native American land use, which arguably had much less impact, to a farm, to a resort from the 1960s that then became, or it had inklings of growing greatly, and they started to do development to turn it into a much larger resort. Luckily, that didn't happen. Unfortunately for them, they went bust, but then luckily for us, we had a building we could obtain. So there is restoration even on this property that needs to be done to be able to move forward with an ecologically resilient and sustainable path. And then that leads us to the idea of plan for future development. We're in a strategic planning phase here at Yestermorrow. We have plans. They're in the nascent stages. They're just little buds of plans at the moment. But there inevitably will be future development. And we architects and landscape architects love to come up with plans and designs and ideas for future development. So there are quite a few. I will show a little bit, because it inevitably will change as leadership changes, as times change. But then, as I mentioned before, but the point is we're a school. So what we really want to do is to be able to teach all of this knowledge and share it and grow the knowledge base of our community near and far. But ideally, with this program in particular, grow it near so that we can have an impact on locals to be able to do the best management practices that Friends of the Mad River and the WNRCD are recommending. So we'll hopefully be teaching job skills and doing it through hands-on design build in the Yestermorrow way teaching. So the first step is to gather, learn, observe, and map, to learn from the history of the place, the ecology, the water, the rock, the vegetation, the animals, the people. Here are just two examples of some mappings of the geology of the site. Yestermorrow, this building here is right about here. This is this little crevice. So this gives an idea of the topography. It's a very steep, these are 1 foot contours, so that's why they're so close together. Very steep there. This is a wetland map from the state of Vermont. So it indicates where we have wetlands on the property, including a wetland buffer that the building is currently in. And then you see our solar panels there. Thank you to the beavers for making a lot of this flexible wetland. And I just always love to give a shout out to the beavers because they're our unofficial mascot. And then this is a geology map. And I didn't really have time to kind of study what all these different strata are. It's bedrock, so it's not necessarily what's quite on the surface, but it's a fascinating way that they run north-south, just like the ridgelines and the river and the highway. And one of our founder influencers, who also was a major founder and influencer of the Friends of the Mad River, calls Yestermorrow's site a river delta. And I always find that to be a really interesting analogy because it's not what you think of. It's not like the Nile or, you know, one of those classic river deltas, but it really is. It's this incredibly steep ravine that at the moment doesn't have very much water coming down it, but at times it does, even today, even not today, but even currently. This summer, we had multiple examples of times when it was just rushing like crazy. And the water comes from Warren. It's not part of the Folsom Brook. That's a different ravine. But so if you look at the shape here, it really is interesting how it fans out. And then, I mean, Route 100 would have been built in the, you know, at some point, it may have been a byway of some import in the 17 or 1800s. It wasn't paved until mid 1900s, but it definitely seemed to have acted as a dam of some sort. And so we have a lot of silt and a lot of buildup, and these wetlands are, inevitably part of the highway being there. Like I mentioned, the human impact is undeniable. You can't talk about the ecology without it. And so this map photo was taken before that bunkhouse that's up the hill was there, which is right there. But when we built that building, we found absolutely no ledge. We didn't hit any rock when we were driving our helical piles down into the ground. And it's very rare in Vermont. I don't know anybody who's built in Vermont, but it's very rare to not find ledge if you try to go a few feet down. So even though I'm showing an ecology bedrock map, that's not, in our little river delta, that's not near the surface. But it really is amazing to me how much water comes off of this hillside, particularly in this ravine, but really it just washes down the hillside at different times of year and in different forms. Sometimes it's huge ice flows that melt slowly, and other times it's very fast and dramatic water, rainwater mostly. There's a little photo. Again, we're gathering data. We're thinking about the history of the site. This is this building. We're roughly right in there. This is the part that we had to take down because it had degraded so much, and then we ended up reusing the foundation and building a small timber frame there. But yeah, polo was what the field was used for back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, before those solar panels were out there, before the beavers had the run of the place. Polo and tennis were both huge here in the valley, and the Alpen Inn, as this was called, was very central to that. And so the land use, the construction, the history, the environment, all have implications, and all of those things have politics around them, and they have stories, and they have meaning, and they have impact. And it's really quite fascinating. And I'm so grateful to places like the Waitsfield Historical Society to keep records of these things. And it helps us understand why things are where they are today. So again, talking about gathering information, gosh, that's really washed out. Mapping and data are so key to understanding a site. We have a sustainable forestry management plan that was done about 20 years ago for our property here. And this is just an excerpt. They were analyzing in a particular stand what are the quantities of different types of trees that we have here on the property. And then the map, I'm sorry you can't see it. There are lots, I guess you can kind of see it. There are trees, but it gives you an idea. The main building, the area we call the Arches, the old tennis courts, which are now where we do a lot of our construction and carpentry projects, because it's very helpful to have paved land in a cold, wet climate. And then some of the little buildings that we've built, and then some power lines and rights of way and wetland and the highway. And if you can't tell, I love maps and drawings. I guess I chose the right profession. So after you've analyzed and taken the data and really thought about it, then you start to consider it and analyze it more carefully, and the communities and the resilience and the human impact, and then how can we continue to impact it as humans and learn from what was done prior by doing things like restoration and helping the ecological systems with adaptability and making them more resilient by being able to adapt. Again, considering the different aspects of a community and analyzing a site for what might happen. And this summer, I would be remiss if I didn't date again, as we all know, however, that this summer has shown us dramatically how difficult our topography is when we're met with climate change and the amount of water that is coming at us at certain times in unpredictable ways. So that has reminded us how important all this whole topic is. These are a couple of images of restoration projects, sort of like the one Ian was talking about with the microbes in week 2 in the Gowanus Canal. But this is a little bit more intentional. It's the upper right is the remediation of a copper mine, and the lower right is the remediation of a power station. And then this is an example of phytoremediation, which is where the plants can absorb and sometimes even break down contaminants and toxicity in a soil. Sometimes the toxicity remains then in the plant, and again, then the plant needs to be put somewhere. But it is pretty remarkable what plants and animals can deal with, but in this case, what plants can potentially help with. There's a practitioner named Ben Canonica Farm and Forest, I believe is his firm, and he's based over east of Bethel. And some of the photos I grabbed from his website, because he is one of the few excavators who has the equipment. He's invested very heavily in the equipment to be able to help sites be more resilient. He is We've been trying to get him on the property for months, just to take a look at things, because his knowledge is so great and his ability is so great. He's deep in, dam removal, or at least analysis of dams to see what needs to be removed. And all of those, the kinds of work that he is doing is what we would love to be able to teach more people how to do here. So I'm hoping that at least he'll be able to help us with our steering committee to put together curriculum. But he really is doing a great job of getting things to be more resilient, particularly for flooding and the immense amounts of water that we've been seeing in storms. Then you get to the stage that Yestermorrow does a lot and loves and tries to teach people to do, and that's design and build, and the slow spread and sink, plan and restore stages. So here we are back at an aerial view of the Yestermorrow campus, and it shows a little bit of the waterway that I was talking about. This blue line is the kind of the main water channel that comes down this ravine and then comes into this river delta and spreads. It mostly goes along this line between a series of ponds that somewhere along the way were culverted in very undersized, very long culverts. I assume it was when the Alpen Inn was built. It may have been when the Alpen Inn was considering building 250 more rooms of inn. I'm not quite sure, but anyway, it's causing a problem for us now because those culverts get completely overwhelmed and then the water is completely out of control. So this waterway that's trying to be forced through these little human-made things to get to this nice little beaver pond, and then under another undersized culvert that goes under Route 100, and then floods this little farm field across the way, really is not a resilient or a sustainable site use or manipulation. So this is existing condition. And then this in 2013 was a plan when we were going to develop the campus a bit. But daylighting that culvert was one of the big priorities because it's one of the number one, it's a huge point source problem for us. It's point source flooding 101. So here's a little zoom in of that same culvert area. This is the really steep hillside that's coming down. And this is the water coming down in the ravine. And then there's a pond here. And then there's this really long straight culvert that's literally, Anna, wouldn't you say it's like this big around? I mean, we almost can never find it because it's buried in silt and gravel. But when we do dig it out every once in a while, it's tiny, it's ridiculous. So daylighting that brook is a big priority. And so this was a plan that was done to basically recreate a stream bed. After the summer of 2023, we almost have a stream bed that the water created for itself. It didn't have enough, it made its own. And so we've basically had to close a couple of cabins and a whole trail connecting those cabins because we're talking holes that I could almost come to my waist, the amount of erosion that created this ravine in places and left maybe a few tree roots and washed away some huge logs and a lot of rock. So daylighting that culvert is a really important thing for us. Our property line is right here. So unfortunately, the next culvert, which is again long and undersized, we can't really get involved with, but at least we can slow spread and sink the water in the area that we can control. And we can help the water do what it's going to do anyway and predict it a little bit more and not try to live in conflict with it. Here's a little cross section of the stream bed design, which I find pretty interesting. So here's the little existing culvert pipe. And here is the slope coming down. This is, I guess, the slope coming toward us, and then that's the steep slope going up the hill over there. So it's a multi-layered process. It's engineered in order to be resilient and sustainable and be able to continue to handle the amount of water that's going to come through here. But one of the key things is the variety of sizes of material, especially the boulders, and then also the plantings, the riparian buffer, the trees, grasses, native plants that will help retain everything that we put in. The state basically wants us to give it a 25-foot buffer on either side once we've done this. And that Dan Riker, who's one of our board members, is a kayaker and is really into wetland and waterway health. And that's his typical best practice also, is a 25-foot buffer of any water body, including ponds. So people are mowing right up to ponds. It looks really nice and it makes the access to the pond really nice, but the buffer gives the land and the plants and the animals and the microbes and the fungi and everything the space to start to reclaim and hold and retain and be resilient for future plans, for future storms, plan for future storms. So finally, how many days in time? Okay. We want to be able to teach all of this, and we want to be able to spread the word. A couple of the other things on campus that I forgot to put photos in, but we have put in water bars in our driveways, which prevent, if water starts in a channel, in a heavy rain, heavy runoff storm, the water bar stops that and it directs the water off and then gives the water a place to, again, slow spread sink. So, sort of a little well. And then that's lined in rock and the water bar is lined in rock. And Ian, one of our staff members, has done a really nice job of putting some timber in that also to give it structure, because the snow plows and some of the trucks and things hate water bars. And the little water bars that I've put on my driveway from Ira and Friends of the Mad Rivers recommendations are bearable, but at Yestermorrow, it's a bigger scale, and then the plows are bigger. And so the water bars have really, really helped. In several years since I've been here, we have had our driveway wash out a few times. And then this summer, we almost did, but with the installation of the water bars, I think it helped a lot. And I think the one that you cross as you're coming to the upper parking lot wasn't even there when it almost washed out. And I think if it had been, we would have been totally fine. So water bars, check dams, which were described by both, I think, Holly and Ira, which are piles of rocks that stop in a swale, that stop water as it's flowing down, just again to slow it all down so that the power doesn't overcome the material that's in there. So check dams, water bars, daylighting a culvert are all things we're really trying to accomplish here on campus and be a demonstration site for, then be able to teach people how to do these things, whether professionals or homeowners. So here's just a little bit of a timeline of what I've kind of already been saying, and just to reiterate it, Friends of the Mad River and Robbins de Beaumont Foundation both came together to talk to me about developing this curriculum idea that I was having in 2019. And then in 2021, the WNRCD got a grant from the Champlain Basin program to help develop the curriculum, form a steering committee, and move it forward. Here we are in 2023. All the floods were a big call to action. Our curriculum is more important than ever, teaching everyone we can the best management practices, and then working with our partners and resources who've given talks to us. 2024, we see strategic planning and process and projects moving forward, and I'm really hoping in the next year or so to launch this curriculum and get some projects that we can teach the hands-on portion here on our campus and elsewhere in the valley. There are there's a new rec hub going in that has a lot of interest in ways that we can help teach this curriculum in their property. There are parking lots, lots of impermeable paved and gravel areas that could use a lot of help, and trail building, parking lot, making parking lots more permeable, and then treating the water that's rushing off of parking lots. Holly, in her talk about rain gardens, talked about the one at the Mehuron's parking lot. There are actually two in that parking lot that Yestermorrow and Holly and our friends had a hand in, and they handle a lot of the runoff. And she talks about the maintenance of those being one of the biggest problems because they clog so frequently with pollutants, salt and silt and garbage and things that have washed off the parking lots into these little rain gardens. But then again, it's really slowing the water from getting to the Mad River, which is right behind the grocery store. So anyway, we really are hoping that we can make more of these projects be elsewhere in the valley, as well as on Yestermorrow's campus for teaching purposes. Our target audience for our curriculum is a whole variety of professionals. So landscape designers are definitely an audience, although they're also a resource. I think a lot of them will be able to teach some of the curriculum, and we're assembling them. People like Holly and her co-teacher in some of our classes, Rachel Gregorian, who does a lot of great ecological landscape design and installation work around the valley. Landscape contractors, people who use excavators, people who manipulate the land. Here's another photo of Ben Canonica and his amazing tools that he uses to give ecological solutions to waterways. Property managers and real estate agents are a huge area that I think could use the knowledge, and hopefully will take us up on it. Particularly property managers are the ones that are leaned on heavily by condo boards, private homeowners, property owners, places like Mehuron's and Shaw's, all those commercial developments. And they're really pressed to do things as inexpensively and quickly as possible. And yet we really need for them to be part of the solution. And so our steering committee that we're working to assemble, I really want a lot of them in the conversation. One of the great things about the Champlain Basin Program grant that we got was it included scholarship money to make sure that everyone doesn't have to pay to attend the programming. Because there are going to be many hurdles to get people to take part in this programming, and we definitely don't want the financial one to be the one that stops everyone from coming. Recreation groups, trail building organizations, some of them are doing great work, and we definitely want them to be part of the conversation. But then others, I think, could use some more knowledge, which is great, which would be great to give. And then homeowners, of course, the more the rest of us know, the better. And Yestermorrow was founded to bring together designers, builders, and homeowners to be able to everyone to have the same conversations and understand each other's languages. So we definitely want homeowners, just like property managers, in our curriculum. And maybe they aren't taking the job skill one, but at least they can take a summary that gives an idea of what is a check dam, what is a water bar, why is it important. So really the first steps are we're working on putting together a steering committee with regional professionals to figure out what the feasibility is, what the need is, what the likelihood of people to come to the curriculum that we're planning. Then we get into the curriculum specifics, scheduling it, funding it, when do they run, what's the structure of them, what does it look like? And then finally, we'll head toward the hands-on project-based learning, identify the sites, use them to teach, and for long-term demonstration to prove the point. Just like our community composting program is right now to be a resource for people to bring their composting needs, but then in the long run, we want it to be a teaching and a demonstration moment for as many people as possible. And finally, I just wanted to give everyone a few resources. If you want to dive into more of this, I'm always here, and I definitely admit I don't know all of it. I'm more an architect than a landscape designer, even though my love is landscape design. So there are, of course, people who know more than I, but these 6 books are really influential on me. Design with Nature, Ian McHarg, if you haven't read it or heard of it or seen it, you should, because basically all of landscape architecture in the last 50 years has been based on what he taught with this book, Design with Nature. And it's really all about the early part of the process that I was talking about, the mapping. He got his design studios at Penn to draw these incredibly beautiful, but also really highly richly full of information, analyzing different ecological patterns visually. A Landscape History of New England is a huge resource for me. Reading the Forested Landscape by Tom Wessels is a wonderful one. Hands on the Land, A History of the Vermont Landscape by Jan Albers is a wonderful resource. The Best River Ever is in our library here, and it was put out by the Mad River Valley Planning District back in the 80s. I want to call Josh, who's at the planning district, and see if they've ever updated it, because I would love to see an update, but I'm sure it still is really interesting. And then last but not least, there's an exhibit at MoMA right now called Architecture and the Rise of Environmentalism. And it covers a lot of the ideas around site work and landscape and Ian McHarg and a lot of things like what were happening in the Mad River Valley at the time in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, really what Yestermorrow was born out of. But it shows how far we've come and yet how it sort of stalled out, and how many ingenious ideas had come in the area of land use and construction and design. But it's a lot of what we're talking about here. So that's about it. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to the Robbins de Beaumont Foundation, which gave that original seed funding for curriculum development, for Friends of the Mad River for all their inspiration and advice, to the Winooski Natural Resources Conservation District for the partnership and the grant funding. Hopefully this is a successful start to making more sustainable sites. Thank you. Any questions? Somebody else want to talk a little bit? Yep. Yes, absolutely. I would love that. I think almost everything we do, we hope we can teach it here and then people can take it wherever they go. Because we do so much hands-on and we're pretty rural, we like to be able to focus it on a project right here in our backyard. But yeah, ideally, it goes really far. And I think Friends of the Mad River and the WNRCD are pretty amazing, because a lot of the ideas they've come up with in our little valley have gone really far and have a lot of potential to spread, and have influenced a lot of ecological research and waterway manipulation. So that's a long way of saying yes. Yeah, but thank you for asking, because yes, I absolutely hope so. Japanese knotweed. Knotweed. It it has a couple of benefits. It's a very late blooming plant, so my honeybees love it because it's a source of pollen late in the season. And there are some people who are here in the valley even who are doing who are making some products out of it, because they're getting some health benefits from maybe resveratrol, or it's thought that there could be some anti-carcinogenic properties, or there may be some anti-tick properties, or we're not sure about that. Other than that, It's an invasive species. It came, I don't know when it came to the valley. I should know that. In Hurricane Irene or Tropical Storm Irene that devastated the valley in 2011, that's when it really spread because the floodwaters just spread so far. And it reproduces by rootstock, by stem, by seed. Almost any part of the plant will regrow, and it needs about that much soil to regrow in. And so it just spread like crazy through the valley and all over Vermont. And Vermont is often later than a lot of these other, even other New England states, to experience these invasive species, because often they come in more populated areas because either they come in through gardening or they come in through highway departments, or they come in through on trucks, you know, in the tread of trucks, or you know, they travel in a variety of ways. But knotweed happens to travel very well in water, and so it spreads like crazy. And even we've seen, even when we just built the bunkhouse up there, just the little bit of topsoil that somebody brought in after they did something, there was some knotweed in that. And the one benefit that I find in it is its early stems are bright red. And so you can recognize it when it's first sprouting in the spring. And so if you get it repeatedly over and over and over, mechanical control is one of the most effective ways of getting rid of it. I advocate for that over chemical control. So pull it up, and if there's a sea of it, then cover it in black plastic and try and cook it out for several years. Friends of the Mad River, and they mentioned in their talk, has a demonstration site called the Austin Parcel downriver just a little ways near the LaRoe swimming hole. And they got some grants, and they partnered with several organizations to find ways to at least contain it and revegetate with native plants, because you know, nature loves a vacuum, so or abhors a vacuum, so it's going to fill it. So if we don't put something else there, the knotweed will come back, or something else will come back. So it's a multi-stepped approach, but they've done great work. But it's an immense task, and a lot of the sites are almost inaccessible and very steep banks, and the knotweed doesn't care. So yeah. It looks sort of, people think it might be bamboo or related to bamboo because it has a thick hollow, a strong hollow stem, ribbed stem, and then it's sort of a heart-shaped leaf. And then the flower is kind of white and feathery very late in the season. And it gets about maybe as tall as that archway. It gets quite tall. Yeah, it starts out tiny, and then by the end of the season, it's that big, and then it dies back, and then it grows like that every season, but then it just doubles in its density and size. Right. Right. And then it also prevents anything else from growing that might have a deeper root to go in and have more holding power. Yeah, I mean, I came from a very native focused background. All the training that I did with UConn and the Master Gardener program, and was very much against invasive species. And then when I came to Yestermorrow and I took permaculture classes and learned that, well, you know, we're invasive. What's native, what's invasive? It's hard to define that anymore. But there are invasive species that we classify as such that are more problematic than others, and some affect certain places more than others. And knotweed is the one that we really struggle with. And I love that people are trying to find a benefit for it, because if humans fall in love with it for another purpose, then it doesn't have a chance, right? So I also know a guy who does really inventive sushi, and I think he's been trying to wrap things in knotweed leaves, and I don't know, it'd be great to find a reason to just harvest the what out of it. So, anyway, yeah, it's interesting. I forgot to repeat the questions for the online audience.
The thing about the restoration
Mm,
and also, yeah, I'm glad you addressed the native. Both.
yeah,
But in the restoration, especially with rivers, right? You know, you gotta have equipment. What are you restoring to?
right.
And like this about that, and also about the energy effect for water. Why they're so impactful because everything's built right next to water.
Right.
And so how do we address that situation? Where like in some ways you have to let go of some of the things that exist.
Mhm.
Beloved structures or places that humans want to be in because that is actually where the water needs to go.
Right.
Certain places, right? And so,
Yeah.
so this is what I mean. It's like a question but a comment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's fascinating, and I think it's so important for Vermont to grapple with that, and many places. Um, the age of water power and mills and industrialization is why Waitsfield and Warren moved from a plateau location down to a valley location and became completely rooted, invested, and centered in an unsustainable, unresilient place. Montpelier is the same, Barre is the same, Northfield, I mean, you name a town in Vermont that isn't that way, that's been around for more than 50 years. It's a really important question. And I think, you know, Montpelier is working to ask some of those questions and have those debates, and they're not fun. They're fascinating. They're going to upset people. It's going to result in people being displaced or lovely, beloved structures being demolished. I know the high school in Montpelier is one of the questions. It's basically in what should be a wetland. And if it hadn't existed, if that wetland had been allowed to be, would the river have clogged as much, which then backed up into the downtown? Possibly not. I think that, you know, people with a lot more knowledge than I could model that, or probably already have. U32 is way up high on a hill and could be a much more sensible place, but it's not walkable from downtown. So, you know, but should downtown even be there? I mean, you can't tell my favorite businesses that they can't be there, but they're literally over a river, or they've channeled a poor river to try to even build the building that they're in. So it's a really challenging question. And I think I grew up in Colorado mostly and was just out west, and the development and the lack of water is there such a big issue. And I I hear and I read and I listen to everyone talking about how at some point oil won't be the most prized thing, it'll be water. But then there's always too much of a good thing, right? And Vermont is one that has that other end of the spectrum. One of my favorite authors, he wrote a book and he talks about the Rust Belt just rebranding itself as the Water Belt, because it's been shrinking for many years in terms of population and in terms of the industry, but it has way more water than all of the places that are growing in the United States, which are south and west. And so potentially the value will return, and the United States will need to recapture a lot of those spaces, but then they're going to have to learn how to deal with all the places that were built right on the rivers to capitalize on the water power. So it's a pretty amazing question. Yeah, and slash statement. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Great. All right. Well, thank you all for coming, for your attention, for humoring me on all my favorite things to talk about. And if you want to help support Yestermorrow further this curriculum, we are always in need of many wonderful donations, and we appreciate what everyone has done thus far to support this program and all of our many other programs. stay tuned and be sure to get the Yestermorrow catalogs and look at yestermorrow.org to find out when this curriculum will get going and when we'll be offering the programs. And we'd love to have everyone back for as many of those as possible and spread the word and come back and come often. Okay. Thank you.